So Paolo was in South Africa for 3 weeks, and his car has been sitting in my driveway next to this Stinger. And the more I drive the Stinger, the more I thought, let's put these two head to head. Now, we just did a full and comprehensive review on this Stinger, and we'll hit the highlights for this video, but if you're still interested and still curious in this thing after this, go click that link down in the description to the full review. Under the hood here, we have a brand new engine for this GT line. Gone is the engine that originally debuted with the Stinger back 5 years ago. We no longer have that 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder. We now have the same 2.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that you get in the Genesis lineup. And it's a good improvement because it brings power figures up over 50 horsepower to 300 horsepower and 311 pound-feet. Put your foot down. There's some spool, but you do feel the difference. The added power is a welcome change, but this makes me even hungrier for the even more power that the V6 brings. Speaking of V6, enter the G70. What Paolo's got under the hood here is a 3.3-liter twin turbocharged V6, making 365 horsepower and 376 pound-feet of torque. It's more power, but it's only 65 more horsepower and 65 more pound-feet of torque. So why does it feel so much quicker? Well, the 4-cylinder Stinger is using a single turbo, and it's pretty big, so it takes a minute to generate boost pressure. The G70 is using twin turbos, so it's able to use smaller graduating turbos to build boost quicker and carry it longer up the rev band. Now, that's not to say that this Stinger feels slow by any means, it's just the power delivery is very different. You're kind of waiting on the turbo to spool, and so if you fall out of boost, if your revs drop below a certain level and you lose boost pressure in that turbo, it does start to feel a little bit numb. But that's why you can dial up into sport mode, and that'll send your gearbox down a gear, keep the engine revving a little bit higher, keep you around 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 RPM, where you start to get into max boost, and that's when this thing will really start to feel a lot more dynamic and responsive. The G70 also has a sport mode. These cars actually have identical mode options, at least, and they really do genuinely change the characteristic and the personality of the car. The difference is the G70 goes a bit further. The G70 offers adaptive dampers, so when you dial it back into comfort mode, the rebound rate on the shocks is a bit greater. You have a little bit softer, more cushy, more comfortable ride, and then in sport, it can tense up a little bit, firm up, keep that chassis in place, and that's of course what you want. Ultimately, mode for mode, the Genesis just feels a step sharper pretty much everywhere. Both cars are great at tailoring their personality to however you want to drive the car. It's just the performance ceiling on the G70 is much higher. And with that, we have to talk about the thing that's really been the standout difference between these two cars: steering. And I don't mean the wheel itself. Sure, it's a nice flat bottom and you have GT line down stamped at the bottom of the wheel, and you have paddles on either side to control your 8-speed gearbox. But what I'm talking about here is the steering feel, and this is something that I was kind of shocked. It really was the thing that stood out to me between the two, even more so than the power delivery or the power differences. The steering that you get in here, unless you're dialed up into sport mode, just kind of feels like a bowl of oatmeal. It's just kind of like numb, kind of sludgy, but in sport mode it sharpens up a little bit, you get a little bit more heft, but it's still not anywhere near what you get in that G70. The steering is just a bit better. Now, I will say this, and I hate to personify the idea that you have to get the top trim or the big engine for whatever car you get. It's simply not true, but for the case of the Stinger, and I mentioned this a lot in the standalone review of this thing, you kind of have to go up to the GT1 or GT2. You get a limited slip differential, you get all-wheel drive, your grip is better, and for something like this, I just don't feel like these Bridgestone Potenza tires are giving me enough grip on that front end to really truly have the confidence that I do in the Genesis G70. I can huck it into this corner coming up here, pretty aggressive right-hander, into some S's, and I just don't quite have the same feeling that I have in the G70. I just don't have that same confidence of knowing exactly what the wheels are doing at any moment. The Genesis just has quite a bit better steering, even dialed back into comfort mode. The weighting just feels better. And then up into sport mode, it feels much more appropriate for a sports sedan. And weirdly enough, I feel like I actually get more feedback when the steering is dialed up into sport mode. It's a bit more heavy, it's a bit more feedback from what the front wheels are, and ultimately that leads into me feeling a lot more confident in what I and the car are doing. I have a better sense of what that front axle is doing and where the grip is. I have a better sense of the limits of traction in that way. So we're gonna send it into this corner here, downshift a couple, tip in. Yeah, there's a good bite, a good sharpness around mid-corner. You have good hold. And then as you unwind on corner exit, you can get right on the power, and that throttle response is so good. Having 2 turbos really gets power to your wheels a lot faster than you get in the Stinger. There's also other things to consider here dynamically. The G70 is equipped with all-wheel drive and has an LSD out back. So while you get some extra drivetrain loss with the all-wheel drive system, you're making better use of the power and torque you do have as it gets to the ground. The Stinger we have here can be equipped with the same all-wheel drive system, but the car we have today is just rear-wheel drive, and it has an open diff in the back, so it will struggle more to put all that torque through the tires. V6 Stingers with rear-wheel drive get LSDs, and V6 Stingers with all-wheel drive get an LSD option, but the 4-cylinder GT line I have here is cheaper for a reason. But with that, let's step outside and chat a little bit. All right. At this point in the video, half of you have either submitted a comment or you're in the middle of typing out a comment saying, what is this idiot talking about? He's comparing an all-wheel drive V6 car to a rear-wheel drive 4-cylinder, and they're not even kind of the same price. And yes, you're absolutely right. However, the point that I'm trying to make here with this video is what you can get depending on your budget, how you can graduate through a Korean sports sedan lineup. And some of these cars, this Kia Stinger and this Genesis G70, they go toe-to-toe with some of the better sports sedans from Europe. This thing has taken on the BMW M340 and it got great marks. And this thing, I mean, this is fantastic as well. But let's talk about styling. Starting with this G70 here, sure, it's the previous generation, and the new generation is a little bit more elegant and more after Genesis has kind of found their design identity. However, this still is a very attractive sports sedan. You get very much 3 Series vibes where you've got a long hood. The driving position is right kind of in the center between the wheels. And then you've even got almost like a Hofmeister kink on your C-pillar. You've got a short deck off the back, and you have a really elegant and simple design from the tail. Now, Paolo has done something that I think is something that all Genesis G70s, at least of this generation, should get, and that's a chrome delete. He fixed some of the grille up here, some of the wing mirrors, door handles, and some of the window trimming. Ultimately, it looks really good. I even like the red brake calipers peeking out underneath the brushed aluminum wheels. But then we get to this Stinger here. And this is an interesting car because it's got an extremely long hood. You've got these fake hood scoops, but it still is an attractive car. You've got a revised headlight here for this past generation. You've got the new Kia logo, you've got your tiger nose grille. All of this dark chrome or black chrome almost mirrors what Paolo's done here, but with a little bit more metallic finish to it. Around your profile, you can see that the car is a little bit longer, and there is some dark chrome accenting with the wheels and the grille, extracting air from your brakes. Now, you don't have the bigger Brembo brake package that you would get on the G70, and you do notice that behind the wheel. However, you still have enough stopping power, and when you get to the side, you see that tapered roof for it being the sport back or the lift back, because that's where you have the most compelling thing about the Stinger, and it's the fact that you have a hatchback. The tailgate opens completely up, you have a huge amount of storage, and with it closed, you have a really attractive revised rear taillight as well. Quad exhaust to round it out, but let's step inside. Okay, and then yeah, inside the Stinger, again, we go into much more detail in the standalone review, so I'm gonna keep it pretty high level here. The Stinger gives you all of the features that you want. It ticks all of the boxes. You've got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, a big new touchscreen, heated seats, leather, but there are definitely signs in here that this is the base trim of the non-luxury arm of the company. You know what I mean? The design isn't quite as high-end here. Some of the materials aren't as good, even the leathers, and a lot of that just kind of comes down with the territory and being a Kia versus being a Genesis. The GT line, though, is lacking a couple things that I would look for if I were to purchase one of these cars. Something like a wireless Apple CarPlay, like cooled front seats, a big pano roof. You have a reasonably sized roof. It's bigger than standard, but it's not pano. You don't have a completely digital cluster, and you don't have a head-up display. But pretty much everything else is there, and the driver assist systems are fantastic, and in all honesty, the GT1 and the GT2 trims are there, and they will add a lot of those features in that are missing here. It's easy to forget that you're in the base trim here because it's really well equipped still. The big value here comes, however, in the back. The rear seats are much bigger, they're usable for someone of my size, over 6 feet, and you have the practicality of the hatchback. You have a huge cargo area back there that's super nice, especially for me with all of my gear, and if you have a kid or a family, or if you ever need to put anything in your trunk, super useful to have that added practicality. And then inside the Genesis, it's immediately more apparent that you're in a luxury car. The leather is more supple, the seats are more comfortable, and the design of your center stack here, it's actually very Audi R8, which is really cool. And you do have the older infotainment head unit here, so it's not quite as nice as the Stinger, but you do have like all of the same features more or less. But you don't have a head-up display in either one, and I think that's a little bit of a miss, but honestly, it doesn't really affect the way that I drive. The sunroof seems a little bit bigger in the G70 here. The cabin up front is just significantly nicer, but there is a little bit of a reckoning. The rear seats are incredibly small for adults, and you kind of miss the practicality of that hatchback that the Stinger brings. But overall, it's still an incredibly usable package. I mean, how often do you have adults in your back seat, really? But with that, let's get into the final thoughts. If you've made it this far, thanks for sitting through a pretty unconventional comparison video. New 4-cylinder rear-wheel drive sports coupe slash sedan slash hatchback thing versus used 6-cylinder all-wheel drive luxury sports sedan. At the end of the day, of course, I prefer the G70. It's more upscale feeling on the interior despite the practicality trade-offs, but ultimately, it's the vehicle's personality and dynamics that do it for me. The Genesis, sure, it has more power, but it just feels a little sharper overall. The shorter wheelbase and better steering make it feel more engaging to me. With that said though, the Stinger has had me more and more in love with it each day over the course of this week. As tested, it's under $40,000 and it's wildly practical, well-equipped, modern, and comes with a stellar warranty. Sure, I'd spec an all-wheel drive LSD V6 with all the kit if it were me, but nothing about the entry-level GT line trim feels base. Thank you to Kia and Paolo for letting me have a rip. See you next time.